I hope there's not too much of a glare. Okay, is this working? I think it is. There's coffee and tea, I believe. Roz, yes, in there, Roz got everything prepared. So a big thank you to Roz. She went and got the bagels. She made the coffee. All right, now, all right, I'm gonna mute. You just have to find the right random thing to shove under it. And it works just fine. Okay. Actually, hold on. Do this first. Okay, Zoom people, I'm testing to make sure that you can hear me as well. Jamie, could you just write in the chat that? Great, okay. Thank you guys very much. Great. Yep, yep. All right, we're gonna start in 2.5 minutes at quarter of. Feels like a fair starting point. Oh, sure, whatever ready means. Okay, this is on now, yeah. So great. Yeah. All right. More coffee. All right. All right, everyone. I think I'm going to get started just because there's probably a lot to say. I'm going to try and keep it within an hour and a half. Um, so maybe less, we'll see. But there's a lot to say. And I've been thinking about this constantly, not just since the trip, but like most of my life. And there's a lot to unpack. There's a lot for us here in America to kind of reorient ourselves to. And I'll talk a little bit about that as we're going through the presentation. What I want to do is a little bit of half and half. I want to talk about the reality of the security situation of the wars that have been going on and where we are now, and some of the actual possible reasons to be hopeful in the future. And also, and probably more importantly, I want to share with you some of the stories that I was able to hear and be present for, because I want everyone to understand kind of the tenor of what's happening in the country, where kind of the country is as a whole, and the emotional reality that they are really all going through. So to be honest, I kind of moved the presentation around a bit, so we'll see where I ended up deciding to put which things, and we'll go from there. So, all right. So first, I just wanted to give you a bit of an overview of some of the most important people that we met with, and I will talk about some of them and not about others, but if there's anything that you are particularly interested in or anyone you want to hear more about, just let me, just ask me later, and I can talk about everything in much more depth if you have the time. So Haviv Reddick-Gur is an analyst. He's most well known as a journalist for the Times of Israel. He was probably the most center-right person that we met with. He is, he has a lot of feelings about Iran. He was one of the first people to say we shouldn't have gone into Gaza, we should have gone right to Iran. So that was an interesting take that nobody was thinking about until recently. But that just goes to show, when I talk a little bit more about the political reality of things, how important and present the Iranian threat is, and how connected everything is to that central concern. And I'll have a slide later that says like what we often think of when we talk about Israel and what Israel thinks of when it talks about Israel. So we'll see some maps on that. But Haviv is really interesting. I think that you should read some of his work. Some of his YouTube things have gone pretty viral. So it's an important viewpoint to be able to hear and to incorporate into your understanding. Einat Wilf was really interesting. She served as an MK in labor, like quite a few, maybe 3 decades ago. And she made a comment that has really, really stuck with me. I think I might talk about it in another slide, but in case I don't, she was on the left her whole life, right? And actually, this is important. When we talk about left and right in Israel, we are not at all talking about the same dynamic as we are when we do it here in the States, right? In the States, when we talk about left and right, we're not just talking about how we view security. We're talking about some pretty central, larger issues as well, around healthcare, around abortion rights, around immigration, right? All of these are on the table for being left or right. In Israel, that is just not the case. They are a socialist country, so there is universal health care, there is, education. Like, they are not concerned with a lot of the things that we are. When you talk about left and right in Israel, it is pretty much only about security, Palestinian conflict, and how much power should the executive branch have? Right now, that has been a huge question. The judicial reform that started a few years ago has not gone anywhere. That has actually been coming back into major conversation, and we'll see kind of where that goes. But I just want to be very clear that when I'm talking about left or right or center left or center right, we're primarily talking about how they view security, how they view the long-term possibilities with Palestinians, and a little bit kind of how much of a religious belief is peace for you, right? And we'll talk about that in a little bit. There's actually a clip that I'm going to show later. Yeah.
Question: when Guru talks about going into Iran, does he mean to degrade their military capacity so much as talking about seriously invading?
No. He just talks about we should be destroying their, their military. They should be destroying any possibility of a bomb, right? Because again, for him, everything that is happening roots back to Iran, which is true. It's just not always as clear. And until recently, that really was not. I think there was a lot of people who doubted how influential Iran was in this conflict. And I think the last year has shown that they are actually totally the central body here, since they bombed Israel. That was the first time in a long time that we had direct threats with Iran. So that's one thing for us in America to really understand, is that when we're talking about any of these issues, you have to understand where Iran is, and you have to understand the power and the plays that are being kind of encapsulated. So when you talk about Hamas, when you talk about Hezbollah, all of this is really rooting back to who is funding these, and it is generally Iran, and through Qatar, but that's fine. So Einat Wilf said she was on the left. She is a peace activist for a long time, and she talks about how after the 7th, but really after kind of 2006 in Lebanon, 2014, the last Gaza incursion, she said, we had a hypothesis. We started out and we had this hypothesis that the main issue was a Palestinian state. And if we could get to a point where we could offer a Palestinian statehood, then we could resolve this conflict. However, and she goes back to all of the history. She said that when you put the data into that hypothesis, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. Because every major intifada, every major war happens after a peace plan is on the table, right? So she has changed her hypothesis to understand the data better. And she really is coming from a place of, there is a powerful enough leadership that says we don't want Israel at all here, and that's it. That's the hypothesis. They don't want Israel, do not want Jewish sovereignty, and she says if you put all the data into that hypothesis, it works. So she said, people have asked her, have you changed your policies? Like, you seem so like such a righty now, and she's like, I haven't changed anything except for how I'm viewing the data that's already on the table. And it doesn't change my beliefs. It doesn't change kind of how I feel. It just seems to be a better fit for how our history has played out. So that was depressing. Yeah. Yossi Klein Halevi, really amazing speaker. I highly recommend listening to his podcast with Danielle Hartman, for heaven's sake. They are just a really lovely duo. They have a really good way of giving you kind of the taste of what's happening in Israel. And they come from different places, so you really get a pretty full understanding. He's in the middle of writing a book, so it was very funny to watch him like clearly in process as he's thinking about things. He stops in the middle of his sentences and writes them down. So that was fun. But Maddie Friedman was one of the really impactful speakers for us, because he's a Canadian. He made Aliyah to Israel when he was, like in his early 20s. and he's a journalist. And he talked about how his first like big job was at the AP, which is a lot of people's first big jobs in journalism. And he says that there's the American group of people, right? There's the AP who are stationed in America. That's the largest group of people who are in any one place, kind of covering any one thing. The second largest group of people is in Israel. Israel. He said when he was there were 40 full-time reporters whose sole job it was to cover Israel and the Middle East. To give a little bit of understanding, when the Arab Spring broke out, there was one person assigned to Syria part-time. They had a civil war, right? Like 15 years, and they never had a full-time person who was assigned to that conflict. However, when it comes to Israel, every single day, they had to have a story, right? That was the top down, was you have to cover something, Israel, Palestine, that's what sells, people are interested. So every single day you found a story to put out there. And that really has a huge impact, right, on how the rest of the world understands what's happening around the world. There is a reason that we do not know at all that there is a full genocide happening in Sudan. There's 150,000 people who have already been murdered. I haven't seen a single story on it. I haven't seen anything on it. This has been years. So what you choose to cover makes the story. Like that is how people decide what they care about and what is happening in the world. So the focus on having Israel in a daily story really, really impacted how the rest of the world was seeing and understanding everything related to Israel. I would say in a negative, but didn't really help. Because then you have to find the stories, and they're not going to be good stories, right? That doesn't sell. They're going to be like bad things. What bad thing is happening today? And it has a big impact on us. I will say a big part of my trip was realizing, just even me as a very staunch Zionist, how much the media and what I have received as an American has formed my view in ways that I'm not comfortable with. So yeah, we're starting with more depressing stuff, and we'll end with more hopeful stuff, just to let you know. So Dr. Kochav Elkayam Levy, if you saw any of the UN women's rights, leaving, talking about the Israeli women who were raped and murdered, not just on the 7th. So then you probably have seen her. So she is an international lawyer. Her specialty is in feminism, feminist law, and how the international courts deal with that. And when the 7th happened, she said, I expected that the UN will do what it's supposed to do, right? It has a program. Whenever something terrible happens in the world, right, you reach out with support to the country affected, you condemn whatever violence was happening, and you begin an investigation. You open up a investigation to see what's going on. And she was waiting for this to happen. And it never happened. It didn't happen. And she was really shocked. When she was with us, she spoke about how, we were 24 rabbis, like all around the table. There's a certain mode, I guess, or mood that we tend to bring, because she said she hasn't cried about this for like a really long time until she sat with us, and she broke down a few times because I think just the tenor around the table was open enough for that for her. But she talked a lot about how she had spent her life believing in these institutions, supporting these institutions, supporting teachers, right? She had very, very close relationships with people she really respected and loved, who basically were all silent when it was her community that was affected. And she pushed a lot. She pushed really hard in the UN to open investigations, to have them condemn the violence. And now she has assembled a team that is going through all of the Hamas footage and documenting every instance of rape or murder. And she says she's doing this because the farther we get, the denial grows as well, right? Already on the 8th, there was a denial that any of this really happened. And that is continuing to grow. And so she felt that the only way to combat this is to be as documented as possible. And this is one of the things I heard from a lot of people. It was facts, right? They're just sitting here trying to find facts because they still believe that that is what people will listen to, right? There's still this faith that if we make things clear enough and we document enough and we are just like very non-emotional about things and very academic about things, then people will take us seriously. They'll really listen. And I hope that that's the case, but it's really a horrible thing that she is putting herself through to watch everything. They do it in teams. Nobody views this footage alone. They are all in intense therapy, and it's really hard. Ben-Dror was interesting. He's a journalist, a very interesting journalist. Focuses on the Arab world as well. That was fun. Sharif Zahavi was really interesting. We'll go into that later. She's the one who really talked a lot about security. She runs the Alma Center, Research and Education Center up north. And she was a lieutenant colonel in the Army. So that's really her focus. So we'll talk about that later with security updates. We went to the Sderot police station. We talked with Alon Davidi, who is one of the policemen there, about what happened at that station. It was very painful. They ended up, the police station in Sderot was taken over by Hamas, and very tactical, right? There was 3 waves on the 7th of people who came. And the first wave was really the trained terrorists, right? People who have been trained with Al-Qaeda, they've trained with military precision, and they know how to imitate the IDF, right? They knew what kind of the policies of the IDF would be. They knew kind of where things were set up. They knew how to act like it. So they ended up taking over the Sderot police station. It was very sad. There was police who were trying to bring people to the station because they thought that was safe, and they were murdered in their cars there. And eventually it got to a point where they decided to bomb the station and collapse it in because they couldn't get, I mean, that was the solution that they came up with. So we went to the new police station, which was recently opened. And then last, but definitely not least, was Uzi Rabi. He's a professor at Tel Aviv, really focused on the Arab world and Iran in particular. And he was probably the most positive speaker. He saw real possibilities for regional coalitions in our future. And that's really kind of what most people, and myself included, think the only possible solution right now is it has to be a regional solution, right? We have to get other Arab countries to be part of this solution, to have a stake in what happens to the Palestinian people. And money normally talks. So there's some economic stuff that's possible, and we'll see what happens. It really depends on the reality in a couple other countries. All right, so that was all the academics. The stories that I was honored to listen to, and we'll go through all of these. So Re'ut Karp told her story on the 7th. She and her ex-husband had 3 children. They got divorced, but they all lived on the same kibbutz, kibbutz near Oz. And she was away in Tel Aviv for the weekend. And her husband and his new partner had their kids. And the kids actually were okay. The husband and his partner were killed trying to protect the safe room. Actually, this was one of the stories that I think the female partner was shielding the smallest child. And so when she was killed, they didn't realize there was somebody else there. The Givat Hatatzpionit, these were the female observers who had been yelling at their commanders, there's something going on, right? Their job was right along the Gaza Strip. They're observing what is happening, is there movement that's unusual, and they saw movement that was unusual, and they have been reporting this to their superiors, men, to be honest, who kept saying, no, 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 nothing is happening there. Hamas wouldn't be able to do something like that, right? Our priority is dealing with the West Bank. Our priority is the Lebanese border. Just absolutely ignored these women. And they were one of the first targets because the first targets were obviously military to take out any type of information sharing. And so most of the women who were here were killed and some were taken captive. Nahal Oz was the kibbutz that we visited. They got very lucky, actually. They only had 50 people who were killed because they actually had they had 12 soldiers who were like home fronts. They were in charge of protecting the kibbutz, and they managed to protect most of the kibbutz. We went to the Nova Festival site and we heard from Shai Klein Weinstein, who was here actually a few months ago. If you went up to one of the Peabody synagogues, I think, right? This was who was here, I think. So he shared his story, and that's what he's been doing for this year, has been kind of going around and talking because he's Canadian. He had just made Aliyah like 2 months before. So his Hebrew is so this is what he's doing. Rami Davidian, we'll spend more time on his story in a little bit. It is like a true hero story. It is sounds like a movie. And then we went up north. We visited Kibbutz Menara, which is right on the border with Lebanon. We'll see some pictures just how close they are, and they were pretty heavily hit. You'll see what an anti-tank missile does to buildings. And then we were very lucky. We went to Majdal Shams, which is a Druze village up north. This was the site. There was 12 children who were killed on the soccer field from a Hezbollah rocket. And that was the most fatalities throughout this whole war that happened, aside from on the 7th, this was a real tragedy. So we met with 2 of the fathers and talked with them, and we'll see pictures there as well. And then finally, we met with one of the sheikhs, Sheikh Tarif, from another Druze village, who was really beautiful. It was really amazing to meet with him, to meet with this community. They joked that, everybody thinks that the Jewish religion is secret, but we just don't talk about it. I was like, I tried to do a report in college on the Druze religion. There's not a single book written about it. So we got some really interesting insight into the religion and their practice, and their commitment to being part of Israel and being part of the people. The Druze community is really interesting and fascinating. We were going to meet with the higher head, the head of all of the Druze communities in the Middle East, but he was in DC talking to the administration about the Syrian Druze and what they're going through right now and the danger that they are in, depending on kind of what happens in Syria. So, okay. Okay. So overall, I mentioned before, they were the more depressing people. It felt like a lot of hopelessness, just not sure what next steps are. It really felt like kind of the death knell for a belief that peace is anytime close, right? That we could get there anytime soon. And there's a real kind of acceptance that having a Palestinian state was never really the main desire of the leadership. It really was the elimination of Jewish sovereignty, and that continues to be the main ideology behind Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran, like, is a major ideology in the extremism of this world of Islamicism. And for us to ignore it is, I mean, I think for a long time, people just didn't want to accept that, or that didn't want to believe that that was the driving force, or that we could reason, or we could find another way with other communities or other leadership, or there's another option. And after the 7th, I think people really have given up a little bit on that, at least in the academic world. I think the academic world has been hit hardest because there's a huge amount of division between Israeli academics and Western academics. The BDS movement has really harmed any type of cooperation or discussion together. So this in particular is a community that has felt incredibly isolated and incredibly forgotten by people that they used to have relationships with. So I think that goes into some of why this was so hard. Right, so I already mentioned the focus on Israel, the focus on negative stories, right? You never heard a major AP story about standing together or the Hands in Hand School or any of the unity coexistence programs that we know about. We know that these are happening, and they just never were lifted up. They weren't, we all know what 24-hour news cycle has done to our kind of news. It's not positive. Again, there was this, I think, a really long-term misunderstanding of Iran and what was really the driving ideology. And the West has a particular way of seeing the world through a Western lens, which, like, okay, that makes sense. That's where we tend to come from. But the world is not in the same place, right? The world is diverse. We are coming from a place of intense individualism. That is not the reality for a lot of parts of this world, right? Community, religion, dying for a higher cause. These are real parts of other cultures that we tend to just pretend don't exist, right? Or at least diminish how important it is to understand those priorities, and to have solutions that focus on how to prioritize the same things that our hopeful possible, allies could, possible allies. We have to see the world through their lens as well, right? You can't impose Western whatever on other people. We have learned this, right? We have learned this through the many times that America has tried to impose Western democracy or whatever on different countries, and it has failed spectacularly. So we should probably learn that lesson as well. Again, we're in dire need of regional solutions right now with the government in Israel, right? If Israel is the one who's supposed to solve things, it's going to be a very, very bad situation, not just for Palestinians, but also for the long-term opportunities for Israel, right? If I always say, like, if you don't care about Palestinians as human beings, then there's still an argument for this because it'll harm us too. I mean, I do care about Palestine. I think most people here care deeply about what happens to these human beings. But even if you don't, there's still a good reason that Israel should not take over the Gaza Strip, that Israel should not be the ones who are in charge of other people. There are many ways I can make this point to whomever needs it. I just feel incredibly strongly about this. Right, and then as I was saying, Lebanon and Syria are in major transitions. We'll see what happens. So Lebanon just elected a Christian president. Whether or not that has any power to do anything with Hezbollah is really unclear. And Syria, like, I don't know, man. This guy Al-Jilani, he was trained with Al-Qaeda, right? That was where he came up. He had a difference of opinion and decided to focus only on Syria, where he's from, and is now talking in a much more non-Al-Qaeda tone. It is possible, like, he cares deeply about his people, his Syrian people, and wants a better possible future for them. Whether or not he will allow Israel to be part of that future is really to be seen. So we're really just waiting to see what happens in Syria. And I mentioned Einat's hypothesis. Okay, so I want to start with Re'ut Karp. So the picture over here is her ex-husband. He was a chocolatier, multiple generations of chocolatiers. The painting, can't see it super well, but so right, he was killed protecting their children, and so she wanted to do something in his honor. Again, ex-husband, they had a really beautiful relationship. And so she opened Cafe Otef. Otef is the name for the Gaza envelope, so for the areas, the kibbutzim that were really right on that border. The red flower, anemone, thank you, I have never said this word right. And that is the flower of that area. So that has become like a pretty major symbol. So if you ever see that flower, that's kind of a nod to that region. The picture in the middle is the WhatsApp conversation from the 7th. So it starts with a text that she got from her daughter, who was visiting a friend at a different kibbutz, that said something's wrong. There are people here. And she's right up in Tel Aviv. So she's calling, and then suddenly they can't talk because right, there's people outside, so they're texting and just trying to understand what's happening. And then eventually she gets a text from her son, who was with their father and his partner, to say, "Daddy's dead. What do we do?" And she said, "Just stay put." So then she's texting everybody else on the kibbutz to see, can someone go? And her kid, anyway, her two children were alone for about 8 hours with the bodies of their father and partner. But then she was able to get down there and get to them. So they made that into a pretty focused piece, which I think was really beautiful. We asked her how her daughter is doing, her youngest daughter, and she's not in school yet. She said, if my daughter wakes up, showers, eats, and then goes to bed, it's been a really good day. So that's kind of where they are. And I think that's where a lot of kids are right now who have gone through this. So education is like kind of on the back burner until they're able to deal with their trauma a little bit more advancedly. We went to visit Magen David Adom. Probably know them. This is their new complex. It is the new blood bank. It was incredible. Almost the whole complex is underground because it has to be protected from rockets and bombs and chemical attacks. So everything is mostly underground, but it's really amazing. So Magen David Adom is the most diverse community in the medical world. They also have some of the largest volunteer opportunities. So a lot of Israelis will volunteer with them when they're 15, 16, 17, and then they'll end up going into the army service as a medic. And then they can, what? So Magen David Adom, they're not a hospital, they're the paramedics. So these are the ambulances. And they're actually a nonprofit because Magen David Adom was established before the state of Israel was established. So they were kind of already doing stuff as a nonprofit. And then Israel said, why don't you just keep doing that as a nonprofit? And they just never took them over. So whatever, that's a political bureaucratic thing. But they are the default EMTs for the whole of Israel. And they also are they work with the Red Crescent. So that is the ambulances and the EMTs that go into the West Bank and into Gaza. They work very closely together. And again, like Israel, the medical world in Israel is by far the most diverse place that you're going to find. There's a lot of Arab doctors and nurses. It's a place, the medical field is really a place where everybody is pretty equal because you're just dealing with trauma all day. Like you don't have time to have anything else except for doing your job. And so the relationships in that world give a lot of people hope. And the hope is that that continues, that there's no reason that the Arab community would not want to continue working in the medical world or with Magen David Adom, which again kind of depends on how the government rules on certain policies. On the 7th, they opened, so the 7th was Shabbat. Obviously, there's generally no blood drives or anything on Shabbat, but they opened up four locations that had lines out the door. And there was one area in Jerusalem where the Orthodox community absolutely lines up. They were very happy to give blood, but they would not write because it's still Shabbat. And so the Arab community of East Jerusalem actually came out to do the paperwork. And it was a really important moment. And the ambulances have been targeted specifically in that first attack because, right, if you don't have EMTs, if you don't have medical care, then there's going to be a higher death toll. This is not, I am, again, not a medic. I am not a scientist, but I guess the way that ambulances and like trauma medicine used to work is that they would have partial blood, which was like just platelets or like particular parts of the blood that had been sorted out. And there's been new research that says actually like full blood is better. And so they started implementing that not long ago, and that seems to have saved a tremendous amount of lives on the 7th because of the amount of and since then, so like on the battlefield, like in Gaza, like in that moment, they have access to full blood, and it sounds like that made a huge difference in survival. Oh yeah, Glenn. Yes. Plasma, thank you. Okay, yes. Ask Glenn for follow-up conversation. Yes, thank you. Very interesting little tidbit. One of the other rabbis who was with me, his wife is a epidemiologist. She's a smart science medical lady. And I guess she wrote the paper on why you should use whole blood. And it was really cool for him to be there and be like, yeah, it's my wife who like kind of makes things. So I felt kind of cool. That was pretty cool. So here are just some of the pictures. We also went to not the NICU, but they also have breast milk storage. So they've started exchange so that they store breast milk, and they're able to get it into hospitals for anyone who needs it or needs help with it. So all of these stars are different women who have donated, and it's just a really lovely place. Yeah. So these are the observers, the women. This is not where exactly they were. This is on a cliff that's overlooking close to where they were. Everybody has a stone, so you can see up here in the corner. It's not the best picture, but if you could see on that stone, there's a picture of one of the women and a quote. Everybody has a quote that they used to say, and almost all of them talk about something about peace. This is a peaceful place where I think her quote was like, look around you. This is the most beautiful and peaceful land. You know, may we all see it for what it is. Yeah. Yeah, not only guns, but also like the patrols. I mean, the patrols, all of the people, there was basically a shoestring army presence because they were so sure, right? So sure that Hamas wouldn't do this, wouldn't try anything like this. And later I'll note that everybody thought this would happen at the north, right? The Hezbollah had been doing these drills, right? There was a video from 2014 about how Hezbollah will infiltrate the kibbutzim on the north exactly the way that they did in the south. So they have been so focused, not so much on Lebanon, they really moved everybody over to the West Bank. And that is such a colossal problem. Right now, it's a colossal problem. So yeah, no, there was just this bizarre certainty that they had Hamas under control, right? That the government knew what they were doing and that they knew how they were manipulating Hamas and they knew what they were going to do. Like, no, they didn't. Okay. So this is Nahal Oz. So this right here was our guide, Danny. He's lived there for 50 years. Up here in this house, all 4 residents were killed, and that's their picture there. This house, they came in and they separated the family. They made the baby stay on one side, and the mother wasn't allowed to pick her up. And they took one of the sons, Tomar. They took him and made him kind of knock on his neighbor's door to open the doors. And he managed to convince them, this family, they're gone. And he speaks really loudly. They're not here. They're on vacation. Don't bother. Eventually, they killed him in front of the family. And this was a pattern, right? This was a pattern, actually, that Dr. El-Kayam Levy noticed, that one of the things that was unusual about the attacks was that if you believe, right, if you just want to kill everybody, right, you just kill everybody. It's not that hard. You have guns, you just kill everybody. That is not what was happening. There was a real plan, it seems, or to kind of torment families, right? To kill one person, leave everybody else, kill the children, leave the parents, right? Use people against each other, use someone to open up the doors. And she said that when she started writing about this particular way of conduct, someone from Sierra Leone called her to say thank you, because this is what we're seeing as well. So this is, she's called it kinocide, right? The destruction of the family structure. And it hadn't had a name before, but it seems that this is happening not just in this situation. So this was the Nova Festival. Actually, I think that I took a video. It wouldn't let me put the videos on. Oh, no, the videos are, okay, well, I'll send you guys the videos later because I forgot that I'm not using my computer right now. Great. Thank you. Glenn is multi-talented. Thank you. Okay, so we were talking to Shai, and here you can see this was really the first section. So everybody who was killed has their own memorial. And that started pretty organically. People, like families, just kind of came and started putting markers or pictures or stories. But since then, there's been a lot of building or like permanent memorialization. And we asked Shai how he felt about it. And he was actually really unhappy with what has happened at the festival site. That we were standing on a paved road. That there was no paved road here. This was just the middle of nowhere. That's like the whole point, was that we were in the middle of nowhere in the desert, right? It's a big festival. And now there's a parking lot here, and there's roads, and they've put bomb shelters in. And he's like, it feels disrespectful to, that was his feeling, was that you can't come and understand what it felt like anymore, right? Because now you see that there's why don't you just run to your car right there? Like, no, they were parked like really far away because there was no parking lot. It's just wherever the tents were. So that was really interesting to hear, and memorialization is a huge thing, and how we build memorials, who's involved in that process. He said, nobody asked us what we wanted to see. We were the ones who were there, but we weren't part of the conversation. So I thought that was really interesting. You can't see super well, but this is inside the bunker not the bunker. This is a bomb shelter. This is a public bomb shelter. There's no door, because, right, these are made specifically for bombs, right? That's the idea. There was a sign that said, like, no graffiti or anything, but obviously inside is completely graffitied. And it was a little weird that they would even attempt to say that. But I think one of the things that I didn't think about until we were there was that most people's safe rooms are built like this bomb shelter, right? They're built to withstand bombing or rockets. There was not, most of them that had doors did not lock from the inside, right? Because it's a hazard, right? Does your child get locked in? And so when the Hamas came in person, it was very easy to open the safe rooms, right? And it just goes to show what Israel has prepared itself for, right? They have been under threat of bombs and rockets for most of the existence, and they have built the infrastructure to tolerate that. They did not build the infrastructure, right, to tolerate an on-foot invasion. And that was a huge part of the trauma, I think, for a lot of people, was that they felt like they were helpless, that they had this thing that was supposed to save them, and this situation, it didn't serve its purpose. And so there's a real feeling of, like, unsafety, I think, generally in the country at the moment. Yeah. Yeah. So Hamas is only in the strip. It's Hezbollah that's on the north. Hezbollah is a much more trained force, right? Hezbollah is very, very clearly an Iranian proxy. They have the same ranks as an Iranian army would. So I think it was, and we've also gone to war twice now in Lebanon to fight Hezbollah. So it's valid to think that that is going to be the place to focus on. But it was a pretty massive mistake on the part of this government. And Netanyahu in particular, listen, he has been funding Hamas because he has been really invested in not having a Palestinian coalition between the PA, Fatah, and Hamas, right? His job, as he believed it to be, was to keep them separate. So he's kind of propping up Hamas and believing that he knows enough to know that they're not going to do anything serious, that they're not going to do anything on the ground. But he felt that he understood what they wanted and what their goals were well enough, and he was wrong. He was wrong. The West Bank is such a longer story. A lot of people had been transferred over to the West Bank. There had been violence. There has been a rise in Hamas in the West Bank. And the police force that is in charge of policing in the West Bank has basically been told to ignore any settler violence. Don't arrest any Israelis. Definitely arrest any Palestinians that might be posting anything or might be Hamas sympathizers. So there's been a huge amount of increased activity in the West Bank. Mostly not, a lot of innocent people are very much caught up in this. Yeah.
So shortly after October 7th, I was at a talk at a friend's house where there were two IDF people, a husband and a wife, different branches of the IDF. They said they had pulled their kids away from the South before October 7th because they knew something was
Yeah.
coming and the government wasn't paying attention.
Yeah, and again, because the majority of the people in the South were the peaceniks, right? This is actually the group of people that were living there specifically because they believed in peace with Gaza. Oh God, I should have. Okay, I'll send you the videos later, because they're really powerful videos. They should have known. They should have known. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, we're living through why it's really hard to create opposition. Um, okay, so before the 7th, there had been for over a year weekly protests against the government because of the judicial reform that they were trying to pass. So there had been a lot of energy. And yet, even in those moments, there was no possibility of a governmental collapse. So there was no real way to change anything. The moment of October 7th, that it was that community that switched their focus and has been leading the hostage square, which, so again, every Saturday night, you go to the hostage square and you're together begging for the government to find some way to get the hostages back. In Israel, there was a real divide, especially kind of in the first months of the war, because most of the country did absolutely put this at the feet of Netanyahu, and there was a lot of anger. And one thing that we just kept hearing was we were totally abandoned, right? The IDF did not get there until a couple hours after the attacks had started. And it just felt like they were totally abandoned. Netanyahu has not been to see a single hostage family. He hasn't gone to Hostage Square, right? That is not kind of where he is. But there was a question of like, we're in the middle of a war that everybody believed in, right? There was no conflict in Israel about the validity of the war in Gaza. Nobody thinks that there's any genocide. Many people believe that there's probably war crimes, right? That is a different scenario. I don't believe that there's ever been a war that there weren't war crimes, and I am sure that there have been in Gaza. That being said, any government would have gone to war. The conduct of that war, right? How you, what your goals are, kind of your plan for the day after, right? That's what would have been different if it was a different government. At this moment, Netanyahu has never entertained a single option for who might rule in Gaza after this, right? He still won't commit to any type of plan, which is why Gallant left, which is why a few different ministers have left. The acceptance of the ceasefire deal, Ben Gvir left the coalition, but that's not enough. Smotrich is still there, so the Religious Zionist Party is still there, which is enough to maintain the government. So most likely, we will not get a new government until the cycle is over in 2 years. It's weird that like a year and a half later, there's less opposition. It's hard, right? It's really hard. And it doesn't take that much to move from one form of government to another, right? It doesn't actually take that much. We're literally watching the possible change in what our governments, how our government might be functioning. It happens very quickly, and it's really difficult for citizens to have a meaningful impact on changing that. So, there hasn't been a call for a new government that's been loud enough. Yeah. Okay. So this is Rami Davidian. So it's him. I didn't get a great picture. I should have grabbed somebody else's picture. So Rami is also from the South. He was on a moshav that was a little bit more inward of the country than the kibbutzim. And at 6:30 in the morning, he gets a call from his friend saying that, my daughter was at this music festival, something's going on, can you go get her? Says, yeah, okay, sure. Gets in his car, he leaves the moshav, and he sees at the entrance that there are two like motorbikes that are just laying on the ground, and there are three severed fingers. Doesn't know who, so he puts them on ice just in case, he talked about, because he's like, I had no idea I knew something was wrong. Like, clearly this is unusual. Maybe it was an accident. Like, I wonder, right? So he keeps going, and he runs into other people who are running away, and they, can you drive? We're running. So he drives them back to his moshav. He goes back. He finally gets to the girl that his friends had asked him about in the first place. He drives her back, but at this point, he's getting calls on his phone and texts on his phone and locations on his WhatsApp. Can you go get this person? Can you get this person? This person is trapped. This person is trapped. So he calls his family back at the moshav to say something is going on. I need you to help me, get some of these people back to our home. And he basically like forms a line where people are waiting he goes into closer to where the festival is. And he brings people back. They get into other people's cars to go to further safety, and he goes back to go get more people. There was one time where there was a group of girls who were trapped, and they were like in a place, and Hamas was like guarding around it. So he sits there and he times the guard change, like how long does it take them to go around, and he realized you have like about 75 seconds. So he runs in and he tells them, okay, we have 75 seconds to like get to my car. They wait, they make it to his car, they drive away. There was the sister of someone who he had already rescued, that he was trying to get to, and they were texting, and at one point she said, I don't think you're going to be able to get to me, they're here. He keeps going, and he gets to the location, but he finds that there's terrorists who have her, and are trying to take her somewhere. So he gets out of his car, and again, the majority of Jews of color live in Israel, right? Pretty much all Arab Jewry ended up in Israel, much more than they ended up here. So he gets out and just starts speaking Arabic with them, right? He's darkish, right? Hey, and he pretends that he's a civilian who came in through the third wave of kind of infiltration. So the first wave was like the most military trained Hamas. The next wave was kind of honestly, the cannon fodder that were very high on drugs. And then the third wave were civilians who were taking advantage of the opening. And so he pretends that he is a civilian. He said, I saw IDF, they're like 5 minutes away. You guys go that way, give me the girl and I'll meet you this way. And they do, they give her to him. And he has to pretend that he's Hamas. And so she's totally terrified until they get in the car and he can finally start speaking Hebrew. Like, it's okay, I'm here to rescue you. He got a lot of calls from people whose children were in one of the bus stations trying to shelter there. And he got there and everybody was dead. And one of the mothers called him to ask what's happening. And he said, I can't get there. The IDF won't let me get there, because he just couldn't tell her. He couldn't do that. So altogether, they saved over 750 people. Most of this happened before the IDF got there, right? And then when the IDF did get there, they prevented him from going into certain places, and he snuck around the IDF to like go get people. So it was a really incredible story. It really feels like, felt like Rambo, some crazy like non-real thing, but it was very real. So. Okay, so I had a video. Yocheved Lipschitz was the first Israeli prisoner hostage who was released. She is a grandmother. Her son and her grandson were with her. We met in the building, the hostage, I'm forgetting exactly what the name is, but there's Hostage Square, which has basically just been a key card, like a public square that's been taken over every Saturday. I don't actually know. I'll double check. No, it's in Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv. Yeah, I have to double check what it was before. Because it's weird. It's weird they were meeting for judicial reform as well. Um, so Yocheved had so they built the hostage community, right? The bring them home community has been incredible. It's a huge amount of people who have stopped their lives and are just working on this full time. So there's a building. They have offices in a building. So we were there, and her husband is still a hostage. So her husband is Oded Lifshitz. He's on the list of the 33 people. This is the first part of the ceasefire. Whether or not he's still alive is very much in doubt. Right, he's 87, 88. He hasn't had his medication for over a year. You know, it's unlikely. So she was talking about kind of her experience in the tunnels, and you know, at the beginning they got some medical attention, but then a couple weeks in, nobody was there. She was, because she was an older woman, she was one of the first who were released. And someone asked, like, after all of this, she and Oded were. They were well known because they're the ones who would meet Gazan children on the border and bring them for cancer treatment in hospitals, in the Israeli hospitals. She talked about how Oded had gone to Gaza to work on education, because he thought, like, the only way we're going to be able to move forward is through our education and making sure that everybody is learning about each other, and you know, and he didn't get anywhere. He couldn't make that case to Hamas. So he kind of settled for helping in the medical field. And so she was asked, like, do you still believe in peace? Do you still believe that peace is possible? And she said, like, it's not a choice. Like, my belief in peace is not something that can be shaken. Nobody thinks that it's easy. You know, like, that's not, when we say that we believe in peace, we don't think that it's magic or that it's going to happen anytime soon or like tomorrow. But what's the alternative, right? And she said, every time you have a ceasefire, you have to prepare for the next war, because you know that there's going to be another war. But if you make peace, you don't have to prepare for anything. Like, you make peace one time, and then that's it. You don't have to worry anymore. Peace. People thought that peace with Egypt and with Jordan was impossible, but it happened, and we've maintained it. Right, Jordan actually helped Israel with Iran's rockets, right? Like, they were part of the coalition of people who were helping to shoot down some of the rockets. So to hear that coming from somebody who had been in that situation, who had been taken, who had been a hostage, was really important, and I think was one of the more hopeful moments of our trip. To say, like, it's not a choice, right? I'm not allowed to think that it's not possible. So this is Hostage Square. This is I don't know if you heard, but this is still the sukkah that has the empty seats for all the hostages. There's a menorah, like, so they just leave a lot of these things kind of up. But it was huge, you know, just massive, thousands and thousands of people. And that's just every Saturday. All right. So this is Shirit Zahavi. She runs the Alma Center. And her focus has always been on the north and Hezbollah. Okay, so we have now left the south, we've left Tel Aviv, we've gone up north, and we're now focused really on what's happening with Hezbollah, with Syria, with Lebanon. That's the conversation here. So this is some of the munitions that were taken from Hezbollah targets when Israel went in for the invasion, that they brought back out. There's more over there. And just to understand like how much stuff was sitting right across the border. So Israel has okay, back up to 2006 was the last major Lebanon war. And the war ended in a ceasefire, as they generally do. And the ceasefire agreement is known as UN, it's 1701 UN Declaration or Resolution. And it basically said that Hezbollah has to stay above the Litani River, and the Lebanese military has to enforce that. Okay, so 2006, they come to this agreement. Almost immediately, Hezbollah is back exactly where they were, right? This agreement was never enforced. Because who's going to enforce it? The Lebanese army is just not capable of pushing Hezbollah back. The political reality is not there. Lebanon, honestly, as a state, is it's hard to call it that at this moment. The same way that Syria, I'm not sure that you can really call Syria a state, right? There's areas of Kurdish land that are, that they're battling over right now, and it's a mess. And that's been the reality in Lebanon for a long time. And that's really hard. I think we don't realize that quite often. So you can see here that July 2022, this was one structure. This is right over the border. And by 2023, they built a huge add-on to it to store most likely munitions or to prep for a possible invasion. So they have been seeing a lot of movements on the northern border for a long time. And the general understanding of what happened on the 7th was that there had been a plan to have a multifaceted attack on Israel, possibly at different stages, and that Hamas might have jumped the gun a bit. And Hamas kind of does their attack, and perhaps Hezbollah should have done it another week later as like a kind of surprise. You have another front now. But it was very interesting. She said, Hamas's attack was so successful in what they deem a success to be, that Hezbollah couldn't be less successful than Hamas, because Hamas are like the stupid step kid who like doesn't really have enough training, and Hezbollah is like, we're the Iranian people. And they were worried. She said, like, I think that they were worried that they wouldn't live up to the standard that Hamas had set, and so they didn't invade. I don't know, but it's hard to understand because clearly they have been prepping. Clearly, like there have been communication on multiple fronts that this was something that was going to happen, and yet they didn't. They waited. They started sending rockets on the 8th, but there was no ground invasion. I think most people had assumed that they would invade. So that was an interesting understanding of the like politics within the multifaceted kind of terror agencies. Okay, so when we think, right, the world generally thinks this is what we're talking about when we're talking about Israel and Palestine, right? We're just talking about two entities. It's Israel, and then it's Palestine, Palestinian people, Palestinian territories. And this is the map that you would see, right? And in this map, like, who is large? Israel. Who is small? The Palestinian territories. But go to the next slide. That is never how Israel sees the conflict. Israel has always seen it in this way, okay? Where it is not Israel versus Palestinians. It is Israel versus Iran and the Iranian proxies. The Iranian proxies include Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis. That's always the reality that Israel operates in. And it's a huge difference in understanding what's happening, right? If you only look at the small map versus the larger map. I think things tend to make a lot more sense. Israel's actions make a lot more sense if you understand that they're really trying to navigate the region, not just the Palestinian people and Palestinian leadership. Okay, so this is a helpful map. You can see where Iran is. And And you can see, so one of the lovely things that Hezbollah did outside of care about Israel was run the capsaicin drug trade in Syria. So capsaicin is the drug that most of the Hamas seems to be on. And you could import it from Iran through Syria, right, to Hezbollah. And then somehow, they have tunnels, get it to Hamas. But it's really Hezbollah, right? It's a very clear route, a very easy route, right? Now that Syria is no longer an Iranian proxy, right? The one thing we know about al-Jawlani is he really hates Iran, right? That's our hope. He hates Iran passionately. He blames Iran for the destruction of Syria and for propping up Assad, which they did. Assad stayed in power for 15 years after the original beginning of the civil war because Iran and because of Russia, right? There's no way that he could have maintained that power if he wasn't getting a lot of money and a lot of munitions from both of these powers. Now that Syria is taken out, it pretty much eliminates the trade route, right? It is very difficult for Iran to rearm Hezbollah if they can't go through Syria. So there's a real possibility that the Hezbollah that we have now might be what we have. Like, they won't be able to rearm, which would be a very good thing. It would be very good. What was I going to say? The hope is, right, the fantasy that might actually be a reality is that if there was an agreement, so Syria now is very close with Turkey. The Turkish government is very interested in like really digging in with Syria and getting in with al-Jawlani. And that seems to be what's happening. And Saudi Arabia sits here, right? Saudi Arabia sits here with this like new guy who really loves money. Dude loves money. He wants Saudi Arabia to enter into the world. He wants Saudi Arabia to be part of trade. He wants, to be honest, he really wants Trump's like golf courses in Saudi Arabia. That's what he's aiming for. And right on October 6th, they were in Qatar, right? They were in Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the Qataris talking about normalization, right? That is one of the main reasons that this attack happened, because we were at the table talking about some type of peace, and obviously that's when terrorism strikes, right? That is the cycle of violence, by the way. It's not that, Israel attacks, then Hamas attacks, and Israel attacks, and Hamas attacks. That's what we think of it. That's what we've been told the cycle is, but that's not what it is. It is the moment you get towards peace, somebody attacks it, right? Whether it's from the Israeli side or the Palestinian Hamas side or Hezbollah, like that is the moment of the violence, right? That is the thing that preempts major violence. So if Saudi Arabia and Turkey and Syria and Israel somehow form some type of coalition, that could be a completely new chapter in what the Middle East is, right? This is the new fantasy that I think many people are crossing their fingers for, because they want to build trade routes, they want to build pipelines, right? They want to build a lot of stuff to get Saudi Arabia connected to the rest of the world. And who has the best science? It's Israel. Israel has the stuff that will do that. Yeah. Yes. Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. No, this has always been embedded in the Shia-Sunni conflict. Hamas was very strange because they are not the same as Iran, but everybody hated Israel enough that it was fine. Yeah, we can all do this. But yes, I mean, many people think that like if Israel and Palestine make peace, that like the Middle East will be fine. That's a complete misunderstanding of what's happening in the Middle East. There's lots of problems that are happening outside of Israel, and that they're not going to go away just because something happened. Even if Israel is eliminated, right? If somehow like Israel is no longer an entity, it's not going to solve peace in the Middle East. Sunni Shia has for 1,500 years, well, no, 1,200 years maybe, been really, really at each other's throats. As who gets to inherit, right? Who gets to inherit the true message of Islam? Yeah. Okay. Sorry. All right, so we're getting towards the end. So this is Kibbutz Menara. Menara, again, is right over the border of Lebanon. And they were some of the most heavily hit. So this is the result of an anti-tank missile. Normally, right, the stuff that was coming over from Hezbollah was rockets, was slightly more advanced munitions than Hamas, but like not that crazy. This was the first time that we had such serious anti-tank stuff being used, not on tanks. So it was really hard to walk through the buildings. And what happens is that I guess the missile, it's like small and then it explodes. And so it gets into the buildings and then it explodes, but then you have these little fires that are underneath the ground because right, the explosion kind of goes up and down. And more so than the missile itself was the fires that they couldn't put out. So people right, are first running around trying to put out the fires, but then a few days later, the fire will kind of re-erupt because it was simmering underneath the ground. So they got to a point where they just let everything kind of burn because it wasn't possible to put anything out. Right, this up here, a few people have come back, really like 2 people have come back because the military is using it. The military almost immediately started using it as an outpost because again, it's right there. So somebody came back and they had a real love of beer. There was this guy who like made beer in his home and his porch was like the beer hall for everybody. So he made a menorah, beer bottles, which I thought was, it felt like, yeah, this is what they would do. Okay. So this is a view from Kibbutz Menara. This is a building that used to be their building. And when Lebanon was established, so Menara here was established before in the 1920s. When Lebanon was established as a country after World War I, they gave this land to Lebanon as like maybe we can be friends, like whatever. This is now a UN building, right? So that's a UN flag right there. There were rockets coming from this building, and Hezbollah has been like everywhere. I mean, everybody in Kibbutz Menara would look out their window and they would see a Hezbollah. They would see a flag. They would see an army, somebody doing some drills or something. The idea that that UN station was not aware of what was going on is, I mean, they were, right? They can see it. It's not being hidden. It's really, really difficult to realize the extent that many parts of the UN played in this overall conflict. Yeah. Okay. Oh, hon, I'll just say we just learned that right. We just are starting to hear from the 4 new hostages what their experience was. They were being held in UN buildings, right, in Gaza. They were being held in UN buildings. They were being held in schools and hospitals. Like this was where they were being held. Everybody knew what was going on. Okay, the Druze relationship to Israel. So the Druze community has been persecuted pretty much like their whole existence. And one of the ways, it's very interesting to look at their experience and the Jewish experience, because the Jewish experience was like, we've tried assimilation, we've tried to be loyal to other countries, and that's all failed. So that is kind of the foundation for why does Israel need to exist. Everything else we kind of tried and fit, it didn't work. Israel, so we wanted a sovereign nation. The Druze community is not at that point. I wonder if they will get there. But right now, the focus is In order to stay safe, you have to be the most loyal citizens of whatever country you're born in. So if you were born in Israel, you are the most Israeli person you can be. Like, you are a diehard Zionist, right? They're the first ones to sign up for the army. Jews tend to be some of the like best loved army captains and soldiers. So they are passionately loyal to whatever country they're in. So that includes Syria, right? Syria, for the Druze community in Syria, they were loyal, although that loyalty was really kind of unclear, like, who are you loyal to once the civil war began? Assad was not a friend of the Druze community, but Al-Qaeda is also not a friend of the Druze community. So they've had a lot of kind of strife over the last 15 years. And now it's very unclear kind of what the future for the Druze Syrian community is going to be. Yeah. Not exactly. It is a closed, secret religion. Again, I tried to do a report on them. Not a single book has been published about their religion. But they are, okay, but we got a little bit. So, so this is the grave. This is the mausoleum grave of one of the major leaders. Their religion basically. Okay, so this is what I got from what he said. He was like, "It's not secret. We just don't talk about it." I was like, "I think that's the same thing." So he said that the original. They also don't love the fact that they're called Druze because that was just the name of the founder. But he studied, basically, the founding father studied all the Abrahamic religions and was like, we're all basically the same. So we should probably like just create a pseudo religion that's focused on peace and coexistence. And that's really the founding of the Druze community.
About 1,000 AD.
Okay, thank you. I couldn't remember if it was 12. I wanted to say 1200, but 1,000. Yeah, yeah. So about about 1,000 years ago. Yeah.
So when you say there's the most patriotic wherever they are, so you have 250,000 Druze in Lebanon, did they not get along with the Druze in Israel? Or?
They don't not get along with the Druze in Israel, but they fight in the Lebanese army.
They fight in the Lebanon.
Definitely, definitely. Not in Hezbollah though. Not for Hezbollah. Right, because there's a real difference for them who is the state actor. Yeah, it's very interesting. There's equality of men and women-ish, right? So men and women are generally separated, similar to an Orthodox shul. But the women have their own leadership and their own kind of stuff going on, and those leaders are given the same kind of kavod, the same honor as the male leaders, I guess. We didn't see any women, but we met 3 people. Okay. And actually this person's sister has a mausoleum right next door. So like, at least they're living up to that part. It was very interesting to be like, oh no, we have complete equality for all women, like totally equal. And then we ask a couple more, well, no, we don't pray together. Even though it's separate. It's like, oh, I've heard this before. But these are the colors of the flag. And this whole room is just filled with pictures of like Druze leaders meeting with Israeli leaders. So they have a picture of Ben Gurion is up there, like everybody. They have documented every moment to like, I think really to like show and display their loyalty to this country. Like they are deeply, deeply faithful to this country. And again, like coming from a community that has been persecuted, and this is their kind of response mechanism, you understand why this is so important to have clearly on display. But it's a very, very interesting community. Again, very important with hospitality. And they were just really lovely. They were really glad that we were there. It was a great meeting. So. Yeah, yeah. Okay. So this is Majdal Shams. So this is Adnan, who we met with. His daughter was Vanessa. So he was the only medic. He works for Magen David Adom. He was really the only trained medic in the village, the area. They heard explosion, and he sent his wife out to go check. His daughter was playing soccer, go check. He kind of starts to see stuff on the ground. He starts to see people, so he starts to run to where she is, and he almost immediately finds his daughter is dead. And he makes a decision that I'm not going to be a father right now, I'm going to be a paramedic. And so he leaves and he goes to treat everybody else, and he saved quite a few children's lives. And once other paramedics came, he went back to his wife and began to grieve for his daughter. So the community, it was very interesting. We were sitting there, it's still a soccer field. So all of this is against one of the walls, but it's still a soccer field, and there were 3 kids playing soccer while we were there. And they come every day to play soccer in the honor of their friends who were killed. I didn't get his name. He was there as well. It turns out he's the father of Guevara, who was hit directly by the rocket. So there was no remains. Everybody else kind of had the body, and he did not. His necklace here is the etching of his son's face. Almost everybody has something that's specific to their community grieving. So whether it's, most people have a bring them home shirts, but they had shirts that were specifically for their child or for their community's children. One more. So there's this huge memorial, but what really struck out to me was, right, teach peace, not in my religion, in Hebrew, Arabic, and English. That even at this site, that's incredibly painful site, they still believe that we can live in peace at some point, as a central belief for them, for this community, which I just thought was really incredible to be able to still hold on to. Okay, so what's the plan? We are so far away from a place where we could even think about possible peace. And one of the reasons that we're so far away is because of the rhetoric in the Western world. We have been told that you have to choose a side, and that this conflict is completely black or white. You are either on the right side of history or the wrong side of history, right? There's one group who are completely innocent and one group who are completely the oppressors. And I think most of us understand that that's obviously not true, and most of our world is not set up like that. I really feel like we have been used, right, through media, through different funding, through all these different things that I used to think were basically conspiracy theories that it turns out weren't, or were, they just were also happening. But I used to scoff at anybody who said our colleges are indoctrinating our children with these crazy leftist views. I was like, no, that's so ridiculous. Yeah, I was wrong. I was wrong. That really is happening on a lot of college campuses. And to see some of the professors who are teaching and what they're teaching is really shocking, really shocking. Yeah. Okay. So a long time ago, when I was in college, there was a decision that basically said that if you are pro-Palestine, then A, you are inherently anti-Israel, and B, the way that we are going to free Palestine is by having a complete boycott of everything that has to do with Israel. Often taken from kind of the boycotts around South Africa, but again, these are really different situations, and it was a really misunderstanding of kind of how Israel works. And one of the key parts of this was anti-normalization. You cannot normalize Israel's existence. Israel is illegitimate, should not be accepted as a reality, and we should have nothing to do with anybody who has any connection to the state of Israel. So that means that you should not be in conversation with peace groups that have Israelis, right? You should not be working with Standing Together or even breaking silence, right? A very leftist group of soldiers who have speaking it out for decades against practices in the IDF, they're off limits too because they're Israelis, right? So anti-normalization is to say that you have nothing to do with anything related to Israel. You don't have conversations and you don't get to peace by normalizing Israel's existence. The only option for peace is the erasure of Israel. The erasure of Israel. And some people will say, well, we don't mean we want to kill all the Jews. We want a nice democratic state where it's a secular state and everybody can live in peace. Like, I don't know where you've been living for a while, but like that's not happening anytime soon. We can barely maintain the democratic nature of Israel as it is. There is no successful democracy in the Middle East. It's not a form of government that this community is, I think, interested in. They're not interested. I'm not sure that that's wrong. Why are we, who are we to say that this is the right thing to do? Whatever, I don't know. All I can say is that anti-normalization has been around since I was in college. I brought Dennis Ross to speak about the failure of the peace accords. He had just written his book, The Missing Piece, big book, it was a big deal. And we were protested, right? That he was a terrorist, he was a colonizer. I was like, Dennis Ross, the US negotiator who is sitting at this table, who is talking about what actually happened in the room. You can't even listen to this guy? No. So this has been very present on campuses. This has been mostly present on campuses, but I don't know if you remember, maybe it was 2 years ago, 3 years ago, there was the mapping project where they mapped out all Zionist entities, which included Jewish day schools, elderly care facilities, camps, right? Unclear. It was originally publicized by SJP chapters, but they say that they weren't the ones who formed it. They say that they received it from something else. So SJP is Students for Justice in Palestine. So they're probably the oldest campus group that's been doing this work. And again, like one of my first years that I was in college and I was very involved in Hillel, I was friends with the head of SJP that year. Like we were in a class together, we were able to sit, we would talk, you know, we were aware that we had pretty different views, but like we were able to sit together and have coffee together. She left and I never, that was the end. Like I was persona non grata from now on. They don't you dare talk to anybody from Hillel. So like for a while, it really mattered who was the student leader. But at this point, it's gotten incredibly, it's just a very extreme positioning. Yeah, at this point, I would say that SJP has gotten much more extreme than when I was in college. Most of this has gotten much more extreme. I think we've all gotten a lot more extreme, right? The right of the Israeli kind of pro-Israel has also gotten very extreme. So, all right, so let me go through this. For the super duper pro-Israel side, okay? Palestinians are a community. They're real people. There is this ridiculous notion Palestinians don't exist or Palestinian national identity didn't start until the 60s. No, like, give it up, like just give it up. Like it's really unhelpful to try and erase an entire population's history. There have been people who live here. They are a community. Yes, you can go back through the history and say different empires have come and different people have, so like, okay, maybe ethnically there's a diverse crowd there, but like socially, this is a community of people who've been living in this land for hundreds of years. Get over it. Just like, whatever. I was taught, right? These were things that I was taught, right? I was taught to do pro-Israel advocacy. These were things that I was given, and it's like that was not helpful. There are many Palestinians who just want to live in peace. Whether they believe that that could happen with Israel in existence is a question, but that's honestly our job, is to prove that it is possible. And our police force in the West Bank is doing the opposite of that. Right? One of the things that I want to tell you and like say that this is something we can do is if we can change the narrative of us versus them, then we can maybe actually get to a point where we can talk about possible peace later. But if we keep going down this extremist kind of place and we separate farther and farther and farther, we're just creating a world where it's never going to be possible, right? The West Bank is majority Palestinians, is going to have to be not part of Israel. And that doesn't mean that Judea and Samaria are not historically part of our story and where we lived. It means that we are a rational people and we want there to be a point where we can live together in peace. And this is where the majority of Palestinians live today, in Gaza. That's it. Like it might happen in 100 years, but the hope is that it'll happen. They have to live somewhere. Let's at least not make it even harder, right, to get to that point, which is actually a goal for some people in this government, to make it harder to get to that point. So and again, this shouldn't be controversial. Oh God, it's very annoying. Okay. So speaking of which, we need to be able to speak out against Israeli policies and practices that make this future less possible. We cannot be afraid. When I was starting out in the Jewish nonprofit world, right, all of us would get together, right, whether ADL and AJC and the CJP and whatever, we're all basically in the same groups. We all do the same program, we all go to the same bars, and we all talk about Israel, and we all are on the same page, right? AIPAC, like, it doesn't, we all understand that there's got to be two states. This is not a, and Israel isn't always like, when we complain about the government, oh my God, did you hear what this guy said? But the moment that you were talking to an outside community, none of that conversation could air, right? And it was fear. It was serious fear, and not unfounded, that like anything that we say can be used against us, right? Oh well, like, we have to be open. We have to be vocal, and we have to hold on to our values, right? We are Jews. We have Jewish values. We are an inherently liberal community. That is what our Torah talks about. And I will never sacrifice that part of my Judaism because I'm afraid of a different part of my Judaism being taken, right? We have to be strong enough that you can do both, right? We have to be able to do that. Okay, and that's basically where I said the last one. Okay. Yeah. Behind closed doors? Yes. What else is there? Again, this is like 25 years ago. There was even more a possibility. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know where, I haven't had a conversation with the AIPAC people, although I know I think that they probably still think of it.
Getting to this, I think the extreme splits on campus simply reflect the extreme splits that have happened in the larger world, that both sides are just more extreme.
Yes, absolutely. I just think that it starts on the campus. Right? College kids are already kind of into being extreme, right? That's kind of where they are in their development. So it's kind of like most obvious there, but it is absolutely a reflection of the overall population. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. 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 So every morning on the tour, on the trip, we started out with headlines from Haaretz and from Times of Israel and from the Jerusalem Post. That was pretty good, right? But you will hear in this country that Haaretz is anti-Semitic. Haaretz are anti-Israel, right? They are still one of the major papers in Israel. If Israelis can read them, we can read them too. Right? We take things much more extreme here, right? Like they're able to have these conversations. I was talking to someone. Oh my God, yeah, we met with this group of like 20 or mid-20s people who were part of a program to kind of go back to the north, to like repopulate the north, because a huge amount of the people who have been evacuated have basically settled like where they are. They're not going to take their kids out of school now that it's safe to go back. A lot of people are just like, I'm kind of done with living on the border. So there's like a group of people who are like, all right, we're going to go back up. We're going to like take the jobs. We're going to like, live in the north. And so I was talking to this one guy, and he was born in Gaza. He was born when there were settlements in Gaza, and he was uprooted, right? That's the language that his community uses. We would say it was the disengagement, right? We disengaged from Gaza. Again, the closest that I think Israel has ever gotten to civil war in recent decades was this moment. And he had a friend, and she was very pro the disengagement, and he was very anti. Right? It's his community, it's his himself. And they were able to talk to each other, right? They were able to maintain a relationship, a friendship with each other. If they can do that, we have no excuse. But yeah, I mean, Israeli, like they're able to talk about this because it affects them and everybody is being affected. I think we have a lot of imposter syndrome, right, which is not totally untrue, but we have to find a way through it. Right? We have to find a way through it. Correct. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yep. Yes. Yeah. 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 Absolutely. Yeah. 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 They did a great job. Yeah. 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 It's complicated. Yes. Yes, but I think one of the more painful things, though, is that I thought we did that, right? The Jewish community has generally been at the forefront of most of these causes. They have shown up for these causes. We've died for these causes. And to not That's hard. But also, listen, I can't change the reality on campus. I can change the reality in this room, right? So there's going to have to be a lot of different multifaceted ways of pushing back on this. You can't, we cannot do all of them. We can find where we can change our narrative in our community, even just amongst a small group of our friends. If we can push people closer, right, together to a point where we can really have a conversation, then we have done something. We have done something that could change the reality of this ground. I'm not on campus. I don't think I could handle being at Hillel right now. Yeah. 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 Yes. The preeminence paper. Yeah. 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 No, I can take a minute. So Haaretz has always been comfortable speaking truth to power, right? This is a paper that doesn't shy away from criticizing the government. They also do not shy away from shining a light on problematic parts of Israel and Israeli society and culture. I think for a long time, right, that was accepted. Right, Israel in general has always been a dynamic place where people are yelling at each other and then they like go out and have coffee. It's like they're best friends. It's fine. So for a period of time, I think this was what people wanted. And as we've gotten farther and farther away from centrist kind of ideology and gotten farther into extremes, it started to become persona non grata, right? They're talking about stuff we're not supposed to talk about. And they never stopped. Okay, whatever. Readership is down a little bit. That's fine. They're still publishing. They're still in English. It's a good paper. And if you read the headlines, you'll realize like they're talking about the same stories. It just might not be in the same place, right? I mean, yeah, it's a tactic, right? It's a tactic to say that a point of view that you disagree with is anti-Israel or anti-this or anti-that, and like push them away from being accepted. It's harder to do in Israel. Israel still reads Haaretz. Like we're the ones who kind of have been pushed away from it in the Western world. I think a lot of the Western community has stopped reading Haaretz and is more Times of Israel or Jerusalem Post. I like the Times of Israel. I think they're probably the most center you can find. Jerusalem Post would be like right leaning, I guess. But again, like the left and right, it's such a narrow scope of what you're talking about. Like nobody disagrees with healthcare. Nobody's pushing back on well, actually LGBT is an issue, but that's, you know, it's just not as, they don't have as many problems to solve as we do. Theirs are just a lot harder to solve, I think. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, they're evil, right? They're trying to bring down the government. They're trying to ruin Israel. They're working right on behalf of the Qataris, and they're working on, yeah. I'm pretty sure we've heard the same about MSNBC in this country. So if you go back in history, you'll see it every time. You'll see it every time. Yeah. Okay. So I want to finish this up. This is way longer than I had meant to do. I'm so sorry. So for the pro-Palestinian side, Zionism is not a slur, right? That's the hardest thing. That's the hardest part that we're gonna get. I am a Zionist. I will never not be a Zionist. Zion is just the name of Jerusalem. Like it's not something outside that we adopted. It has been an intrinsic part of what Judaism is since its founding. It's been a massive part of our desire to return to our homeland, has been literally the thing that we have been talking about for 2,000 years, right? We pray east because that's towards Jerusalem. If you were in China, you would pray west towards Jerusalem. If you're in Jerusalem, you pray towards the temple. Like, this is literally the center of our world and always has been. And to negate that is to negate a central aspect of Judaism and what it means to be Jewish. And I will never compromise on the truth of our religion. Israel is not a Western colonization, okay? I understand that you can talk about it in certain ways that might have some truth in it, but a colonizing entity needs to have a place to go back to. There is nowhere else for these people to go, okay? The 50% of Israeli Jews are Mizrahi Jews who were kicked out of their homelands that they had been in for thousands of years and are not welcomed back at all. So where are they supposed? They're not going to. They've never been to Poland, right? And by the way, for everybody who tells us to go back to Poland, take a look at what happened in Poland right after the Holocaust. No, thank you. Right? No, thank you. Anti-normalization again has failed. You'll still hear people saying, "Listen, when the ceasefire was declared, everybody declared victory, right? Hamas and SVP, we're victorious. This is just the beginning, right? The ceasefire is just the beginning. Give us time. This is the first step toward crushing Zionism under the boot. Colombia was just, modern Israel class was just interrupted on their first day by masks, right? They always have to be masked now. Whatever, protesters and they threw around sheets that have a Jewish star being crushed under a boot of Zion, This is the first step. So that's what we're contending with as well, right? That's also very real, is that there is a large contingency that is aware that their goal is to erase Israel and Jews. Like, it's really hard to, it's you can't get around it. You cannot get around that. If you want to erase the state of Israel, you do not want Jews living happily side by side with Palestinians. You don't want Jews there at all. Or if you do want Jews, they should be a second-class citizen like they were supposed to be the whole time, right? When we were living in the Arab world, we were dhimmi, we were second class. That was fine because we were not sovereign, right? They were sovereign, and as long as we played by the right rules, we were fine, depending on who was in charge. And we should just go back to that. Again, no thank you. Like, it didn't actually work as well as they like to say it was. And if people are really supporting violence and Hezbollah and Hamas and terrorism, then they are not interested. They're just not interested in peace. Don't say that they're interested in peace, right? That's not what they want, and we can't pretend that they do. Yeah. And by the way, that goes for us too, right? If all we care about is wiping out, right, Gaza, if we're like, yeah, let's just move all of these people to a different place permanently, then we're not interested in peace either. Like, that's not going to be peace. That's not going to be a place where the Arab world is going to look kindly upon us and enter into normalization strategies. No, these people are here. They're not going anywhere. I don't know how to rebuild Gaza. That is a long trajectory. But the Palestinian people who are so against being refugees in other countries, they're against it because they're terrified that means they'll never be allowed to come back. And I understand. I get it. That's they're not wrong, right? That's not an invalid fear. So to be honest about who we're talking about, to be honest about the real difficult realities that are in our world, not to pretend that they don't exist. We can't pretend that the whole world just wants to live happily in peace. That is just not the case. There are absolutely people and organizations who are pushing for certain narratives that will not get to a place of peace, right? And whether you realize it or not, we have all been affected, right, by those narratives and by the kind of puppeteers that have been behind the scenes for a really long time. So we just have to start being honest. We have to be honest that for the longest time, and really still today, there's a significant amount in the Arab world that just wants Jews to not have sovereignty, right? We're not supposed to have sovereignty. We're weak people, right? We are the weakest of all the people in the world. We should never have been allowed to have sovereignty. And the fact that we did manage to get sovereignty and win wars is an affront that has to be fixed. And that way, when they wipe us out and kind of solve the tragedy that Israel happened, then things will get better, right? That this is, you have to also kind of understand that there's a whole, the end of the Ottoman Empire, the end of the Arab world. I mean, the shrinking of the Arab world power and Muslim power, like, is also very real. And we haven't learned a single thing about that in any of our classes, right? We do not teach about modern Arab world in any high school I've ever been in. It's a huge tragedy. It's a major mistake because then we don't understand the background. We do understand European background. That's why we see everything as a colonial project, because all we learned about was colonialism in school, and therefore everything is colonial. But like, that's not how actually the whole world works. It's how half the world works. And we should probably learn some stuff about China that doesn't stop at like ancient Chinese empires, because I don't remember anything after that. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Listen, we've screwed everything. Like, okay, yes, the West has been a very large part of screwing lots of things up, but just knowing that and understanding that doesn't really get you anywhere. Like, unless you feel like tearing down the West, which is actually where many people kind of are. It's like, okay, let's just get rid of everything in the Western world. And then suddenly everything will be better. I have no idea what they think the after effect of this will be, but that's very much a thing, right? Tear down America, right? And that should frighten us as well. That's not, I have plenty of issues with America. I'm very concerned about America. I am not anti-America. I believe that this country has a way back, and that this country has a potential, and that this country has a reality that you're not going to erase. Kind of all I'm asking for is for Israel to be viewed in the same way, right? That they are a reality, they are a country, you can't erase them. Let's go from there. Like, let's go from there. All right, well, thank you all so much. Really appreciate it. If, sure. This, yes, so this was this month's like Israel group, and we'll have another Israel conversation next month. Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, and thank you guys for surviving all the way until now. Yeah.